ADHD and money don't always play nice. Today, I'm breaking down the system that finally ended our budget battles and killed the shame spiral for good. Welcome to The Distracted Dollar, the podcast where we talk about money through the lens of ADHD, real life, and real struggles. I'm Vanessa, your ADHD money coach, and we're here to move from chaos to control. I used to track every single dollar my husband spent. And I mean every coffee, every gas station soda, and every random snack he grabbed because he forgot to eat lunch again. At the end of the month, I would sit there feeling completely exhausted while I cross referenced receipts against the budget like I was auditing a small business instead of living in a marriage. I'm the nerd in this relationship, so I handle the budget and plan the categories while knowing exactly how much sits in every single sinking fund we own. My husband is the free spirit who just wants to live life, which means stopping at the coffee shop when he feels like it without having to ask for permission first. That is not an unreasonable way to live, but the way we had things set up turned me into the money police and made him feel like a teenager hiding his purchases. This parent child dynamic started creeping into everything we did, and suddenly small purchases were turning into massive fights. Underneath an argument about $5 at the convenience store was something much deeper, which was a mix of control on my side and shame on his. We lived with this constant low level tension that neither of us really knew how to name, but it was never actually about the money. The real issue was about who got to decide how we lived, and we stayed stuck in that loop until we found a solution that almost felt too simple to work. We decided to give ourselves an allowance, which is just a predetermined amount of no questions asked money that each of us gets every month to spend on whatever we want. There is no input from the other person and no justification needed, so we never have to hold a budget meeting just to buy a book or a snack. I know exactly how that sounds because we are adults with a mortgage and kids and have retirement accounts. And the word allowance feels patronizing, like something you give a 12-year-old for doing their chores. What I eventually learned is that this isn't about budgeting your fun money into a neat little category, but it is actually about freeing your impulses from the budget entirely. So now, when my husband wants a coffee, he doesn't have to check the grocery line or wonder if he's stealing from the electric bill because that money is already his. It stays separate from the rest of our lives and exists for that exact purpose. And the psychological shift for both of us was immediate. Before we started this, every unplanned purchase carried a heavy weight where we wondered if we ruined the plan or if we were just bad with money. After the allowance started, all of that noise just stopped. And the question became as simple as if checking if there was money left in the account. If the answer is yes, then that is our space to be human, and the power struggle dissolved because there was nothing left to fight about. I didn't need to grant permission, and he didn't need to seek it. So we both finally got the same sense of freedom. And for ADHD brains specifically, this system works because it creates a dopamine friendly container for spontaneity. Our brains crave novelty and impulse and the little rush of buying something interesting. But if your budget treats every impulse like a failure, you're going to feel like a failure constantly. When you build a container where those impulses are expected and welcomed, you realize you aren't broken at all. You were just someone who likes coffee or records or a new miter saw, and you have money set aside for exactly that. Calling it allowance might feel weird at first, but it's the most adult system we have ever used because it respects our autonomy instead of demanding constant accountability. It says, I trust you with your own decisions and I trust myself with mine, which is what a real partnership looks like. Setting this up starts with a conversation that might feel a little uncomfortable at first. You have to sit down and get real about the balance between freedom and responsibility, which means being honest about what you actually need to feel like a human being. This isn't about what you think your partner wants to hear or what you think you should say. It's about finding the space you need to breathe inside your financial plan so you don't feel trapped by your own money. When we first started this journey, we were drowning in consumer debt and things were incredibly tight for our family. We decided on $25 per person every single month. And while that isn't a lot of money, it was enough for a few coffee runs or a cheap record if we saved up for a bit. That small amount proved the concept worked because the specific number matters way less than the agreement you make with each other. You should pick a starting point that fits your current goals. So if you are deep in debt, it might be tiny, but if you have breathing room, you can set it higher. Just make sure the number is realistic enough that you can actually stick to it without feeling resentful. The negotiation part of this process is non negotiable because you have to truly listen to your partner's reasons for what they need. If your spouse asks for more than you expected, do not just dismiss them, but instead try to hear them out because they probably have reasons you haven't considered yet. In our house, I actually get a higher allowance than my husband does. I homeschool our kids and have them with me 99.9% of the time. So a simple trip to Starbucks usually involves buying hot chocolate and cake pops for everyone else too. That is just my daily reality. And while I can and do tell them no, we choose to build our system around how we actually live instead of some perfect, idealized version of life. Once you agree on the amount, you have to physically or digitally separate that money into a different account or a labeled envelope. The rule here is very simple. If you have $100, you cannot spend $200. That boundary has to hold for the system to work. When my husband wants something big, like a new miter saw, he saves his allowance for months until he has enough. I never have to approve the purchase or even discuss it with him because he just waits until the money is there and buys it. This allows delayed gratification to happen naturally, not because I'm playing the role of the bad guy, but because the system teaches the behavior for us. This isn't a dictatorship where one person holds all the power. It's a treaty where both people get a voice and some freedom. And that is how the budget finally stops being used as a weapon. A few weeks after we started this, my parents called with a long list of questions because they wanted to try it themselves. They were worried about what counted as an allowance purchase versus a household expense, and they didn't know how to handle gifts for each other or things for the kids. I could literally hear the anxiety in their voices as they looked for the perfect rule book to follow so they wouldn't mess anything up. I completely understand that feeling because the money is deeply emotional, especially when you have spent years fighting over spending or hiding receipts from each other. When you have felt controlled for a long time, a new system will feel fragile, and you worry that one wrong move will make the whole thing collapse. I told them that the gray areas are completely normal, and hitting a question you didn't anticipate is not a sign that you're failing. It is just a sign that you were two different humans with two different brains trying to share one financial life. You figure out the edge cases as they pop up by talking through them and deciding together what feels fair in the moment. There is no universal rule book for this because every couple deals with different gray areas. What trips up my marriage might never even happen in yours, and that's okay. The only rule that actually matters is that you keep the lines of communication open. The system is allowed to bend where it needs to bend as long as you're both the ones doing the bending together. We need to talk about the intersection of ADHD and money because it usually comes with a hidden cost called the ADHD tax. You know exactly what this looks like, from those late fees because the due date slipped your mind to the subscriptions you meant to cancel 6 months ago but never did. It shows up as impulse buys, that felt like life or death needs in the moment, only to sit in a box gathering dust, or overdraft fees that hit because you simply lost track of your balance. This is not a character flaw or a sign that you're lazy, but it is executive dysfunction with every real price tag attached to it. The allowance system attacks that ADHD tax head on and does it without demanding you suddenly become a more disciplined person. Instead of forcing you to try harder, this method removes the situations where you even need discipline in the first place. When your fund money is already separated and capped in its own spot, you physically cannot drain the grocery budget on a new hyperfixation by mistake. A late fee might still sting if it happens, but it won't cause three other categories to collapse because the damage is finally contained. The biggest win here is how this kills the emotional spiral that usually follows a purchase. Decision fatigue is a massive hurdle to our brains, and every single time we buy something, we're first into a grueling internal negotiation about whether we can afford it or if we will regret it later. That constant back and forth is exhausting, and that exhaustion leads to poor choices, which eventually turn into a cycle of shame and hidden purchases. The allowance short circuits that entire loop because the money is already set aside for whatever you want, meaning the only question left to ask is if you have the funds. Our brains crave novelty and little hits of dopamine, and we need the freedom to follow an impulse without a full committee meeting happening inside our heads. Any budget that doesn't account for how we actually function isn't a plan, it's just a setup for failure dressed up as being responsible. You aren't broken for wanting coffee or a new notebook at Target, but the old systems were definitely broken for shaming you every time you felt that spark. This isn't a test of your executive function, but a tool that reduces how much of it you have to use just to survive the day. The most important result is that this shift wasn't actually the balanced budget, but the fact that I finally got my friend back. We stopped acting like a warden and a prisoner fighting over every cent and started being two people on the same team again. That change affected everything in our lives, from our bank account to the way we spoke to each other when we sat down at the end of the day. I want you to take action on this and have the conversation tonight. Pick a number, even if it feels small, and just try it out for 1 month to see how this feels. The freedom you're protecting here isn't just about the dollars in your account, but the freedom to free yourself inside your marriage. If your money situation feels heavy right now, like something you keep meaning to deal with, but you can't quite make yourself look at, I want you to know that that is not a character flaw. That's just what it feels like when your system doesn't fit the brain. On the 28th, I'm going live for a master class called Financial Surgery Find Your ADHD Tax. We're not starting with budgets or rules, we're just going to look at what's actually happening, finding where your money is leaking and start taking the pressure off without the shame. Spots are limited. The link to sign up is in the notes. Until next time, from chaos to control.